Day, February something, 9th. And this is the Ag Committee. And I get in this cave and I can't remember what time it is hardly. But anyway, call the roll. We'll keep it open. One of our representatives is presenting a bill this morning.
Representative Alderman.
Present.
Representative Allred.
Here.
Representative Banks.
Here.
Representative Conrad.
Here.
Representative Crago. Representative Davis.
Here.
Representative Slagle.
Present.
Representative Winter.
Here.
Chairman Eklund.
Here. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 74, Slow-Moving Vehicles Amendments. And to present the bill from the Senate is Senator Kolb. You may come on up and explain the bill as it came out of the Senate whenever you're ready. Yeah, anywhere. Yeah.
Good morning, members of the Senate House Ag Committee. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, the bill that was worked through the Senate, I will explain. I'll just highlight the changes for those who weren't here during the interim. This was an attempt to modernize and standardize the ability of slow-moving vehicles and the way it was amended was to just say up to 45 miles per hour. And then the conforming language that would allow that. It was simplified. And that's really the bill we have. That's the primary change that had happened. And the slow-moving emblem was discovered to be not set at a particular speed. So we decided, the body decided that 45 miles an hour is where they wanted to settle on it, as long as the combination thereof could travel at that said speed, Mr. Chairman. I think there's a lot of questions possibly with this, Mr. Chairman, so I'll stand for questions and we can work through this bill. I think it's fairly simple in its concept. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Questions for Senator Kolb? All right. Mr. Kennedy, can you come up and we'll kind of work through this bill as changes had been made and modifications were done.
Would you like me to stay here, Mr. Chairman?
You stay here. Yep.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keith Kennedy on behalf of the Wyoming Ag Business Association and the Wyoming Wheat Growers Association. This was an interim bill, and I believe all the committee members also have the introduced version of this bill. And as the bill currently stands, we would have to oppose this. First of all, 45 is not a published standard. There is a published standard from what is called, and they're mentioned in the bill, the American Society of Agriculture and Biological Engineers. And you have a sheet that was given to you as a handout, which first of all shows the speed information symbol. And if you look at the right-hand side of the page, you will see a small white circle with a black border, and it says SIS, C Note 15. And this particular diagram has that at 25. And if staff could pull up, this is not the full handout. It's actually 16 pages. But if staff could pull that up to the other PDF, to page 5, I believe. Pardon me, the other document. It's actually page 5 of the 16-page document. That was the one that was sent to Leg Docs yesterday. And to speed things up, because I don't want to keep you any longer than
Mr.
necessary.
Kennedy, did you want copies handed out?
Yes, I believe, I don't know whether staff had already dispersed this.
We got this one.
Yes.
The other page that you wanted.
The other page of this document is page 5, and for simplicity, I'll just read what I had highlighted on that. And it is that note 15 that you see there by that, where it says SIS, see note 15. Note 15, agricultural machines and implements traveling at greater than 25 miles per hour and less than 40 miles per hour shall require at least one rear-facing speed identification symbol as described in ASAE S584. 2 rear-facing stop lamps are required for tractors and self-propelled machines traveling greater than 25 miles per hour. And that's the short version of what the standard that equipment manufacturers abide by. And I think we could open up the PDF that I did send you now. And for simplicity, what the amendment before you does is take this back to the language as it was when it passed committee of the whole in the Senate. And while this sounds more complicated, it actually complies with what equipment manufacturers have done for the past 14 to 15 years now. Particularly with our ag business members, a large number of them have self-propelled sprayers, and those implements of husbandry are rated to travel often at 30, 35 miles an hour. And I've been asked before, well, couldn't I just make one of these signs? And the truth of this is that if I want to get one of these signs specifically for an implement, I have to give the parts store the serial number of that model, and they can tell whether or not it is actually rated there. As a matter of safety, manufacturers change the makeup of the tires, the bearings that are used on the wheels, and the braking system to determine whether or not the vehicle can safely travel above 25 miles an hour. And so with this diagram here explains the last portion of the amendment, section K. And we see 3 implements here. A combination of implements is limited to the lowest SIS present. So in this combination, it's limited to 35 miles an hour. The next page, please. If no SIS is on any implement in a combination, the combination is limited to 25 miles an hour. So you see here on the tractor, and you can really appreciate my deep artistic skills here, it only has an SMV sign, so that combination is limited to 25 miles an hour. So the final slide, please. And so in this combination, what would be the legal speed of this combination? It would be the middle implement there, 30 miles an hour. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I welcome any of your questions and strongly support adopting the amendment that has been provided. If you'd like to walk through that in depth, I'd be happy to do so. But it essentially takes it back to the committee of the whole version that passed, as it passed the Senate on committee of the whole.
Okay, and that committee limited it to the lowest mile per hour implement that's being pulled by the farmer rancher. And up to what speed would be the
Mr. Chairman,
the
that's
range?
one of the beauties as this proposed amendment does. If in the future the Society of Agriculture and Biological Engineers determines that that limit could be higher, you would need to do nothing to allow that change. So it doesn't specifically state the speed, but their standard currently limits speed to no more than 40 miles an hour.
Committee questions? All right, why don't we wait a little bit on the amendment? And if there are questions on it as we walk through
Mr.
it.
Chairman,
Yes,
is anybody else on the committee as confused as I am of what's going on here?
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I don't understand it in the least, I guess,
Okay.
what's going on here.
We're gonna have more testimony, and these people stay around, be able to answer questions. It is, why don't we start with what present law is and how that works, because I'm used to it. Representative Banks is used to it. This is a bit, we're updating this because we'll find out more about that as we bring other people on board. But Keith, while you're here, why don't you explain what present law is and how this changes that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Present law only allows a slow-moving vehicle sign to be used on a farm implement, requires the use of a slow-moving vehicle sign on a farm implement, and it limits their speed to no more than 25 miles an hour. As an example, some of my ag business members have slow-moving vehicle signs on fertilizer carts. Those carts are actually rated to travel much faster than that, but when as a farmer, pull that cart, I am limited to 25 miles an hour and I'm required to display the sign. When my ag business members deliver that cart out to the farmer or rancher, they are required to cover that sign because they can travel at road speed, so they are required to cover that sign. And I believe you'll hear later from YDOT that while they probably have never given out a ticket, I personally have been stopped and reminded to cover up that sign when I was a contractor for YDOT. But that's the gist of the existing bill. In 2008, the agricultural engineers at the request of manufacturers came up with a standard for additional signage that would indicate that particular implement or vehicle could travel at speeds greater than 25 miles an hour, but no more than 40 miles per hour. And so that is the gist of the amendment. That's also the gist of what the bill was when it came out of interim agriculture committee. Really, the only change that was made, we had the Contractors Association had actually found that there was some language carried forward. If you read the entire statute, construction equipment is exempted in a portion that we don't see at all in either the bill as you see it before you now or the introduced version. And we deleted that language from the introduced bill regarding special mobile equipment because in another portion of that statute, they are exempted from construction sites. And with that, Mr. Chairman, Representative Banks, have I clarified anything?
Representative Slagle.
One question I would have is, so if you're running equipment that's a little older and you don't know what that or recommended speed is on, how is it your responsibility to find what that speed is then?
Mr. Chairman, to the best of my knowledge, all older equipment is essentially limited to 25 miles an hour just by its construction. Whether it's my red tractor with a letter that we used to tie a slow-moving vehicle sign on with baling wire when the standard first came into place 45 some odd years ago for slow-moving vehicle signs, or somewhat more modern equipment that actually has it already installed.
Representative Banks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what I read in our current bill is we're increasing the ability to travel to 45 miles per hour. That's simple, that's great. I think that helps out our farmers. What I see in the amendment is that's trying to push it back down to 25 miles per hour. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, the amendment, essentially, J adds in the speed identification symbol, pardon me. And that symbol is what allows the vehicle to travel greater than 25 miles an hour. If there is no speed information symbol present, the implement isn't allowed to travel over 25 miles an hour, which we strongly support that. I've been known to be a shade tree mechanic, and just because I've made an alteration to something that would allow my red tractor to travel 50 miles an hour doesn't mean that it's safe. And so we're relying on the manufacturer's standard and what they believe the implement is rated at. And so to this day, if we go to an implement dealership and look at their lot, you will see implements there with just a slow-moving vehicle sign, which means it's limited to 25 miles an hour. And you will also find some that have the white circle with the black border with a speed on there that indicates the speed that it is rated to travel at.
So the change that we're looking at will not be the old-fashioned slow-moving vehicle sign on all the vehicles. Some of the, there are a few tractors that'll travel faster. Not many manufactured, few German tractors that could go up to 40. But if you were traveling 40, you'd have a different symbol on that piece of equipment.
Mr. Chairman, you would have an additional symbol.
Oh, an additional.
You have the speed identification symbol in addition to the slow-moving vehicle sign.
Which allows you to
Which
travel
allows
as
you
a-
to, Mr. Chairman, which allows you to travel at whatever speed it states in excess of 25 miles an hour.
Okay. Yeah, Representative Davis.
If I was following this a little, I think I'm following what you're saying, but, you know, like hauling the equipment, you know, you'll have a hauling on a trailer, you have the emblems on there, correct? On that piece of equipment. Do you need to remove that emblem off that equipment when you load it onto a trailer to, i.e. a backhoe or a tractor? You have to remove all this stuff in order to load it on the trailer? Or if you leave it on there, are you in violation because it's on the trailer? And it's a question I have.
Mr. Chairman, you need not remove the symbol, and you would not even need to cover the speed information symbol, but you are required to cover the slow-moving vehicle sign. If you go out here on Interstate 80 and see a new farm implement that's going west, you will note that if it's the rear of that implement is facing backwards, that it is covered. When they load the combine up in Grand Island, Nebraska, why the slow-moving vehicle symbol is adhered to it, and it's covered with paper so that it's not visible. That's
Till it gets stuck in the snowstorm on I-80, then it's pretty visible.
Mr. Chairman, I have no idea what they use on those, but I've never seen the cover come off of one.
Okay. Thank you. And most of those guys would have to go through a check station to a YDOT check station, and that's what they would check. So to be compliant, they would follow the rules. So any other questions? We'll continue to answer questions as we go, but I'd like for YDOT to come up and
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
share with us what we need to know to make sure we get this bill right. Hardly ever see you guys anymore now that I'm on ag instead of transportation, but welcome to the Ag Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Taylor Rossetti, Support Services Administrator at YDOT, and with me I've got Captain Dan Wyrick of the Patrol. He's the commercial carrier captain. So I think the important thing as we look through this bill and as we worked it through the interim is that the current statute is really based off the ANSI standard, which is the national standard as developed by the engineers, as Mr. Kennedy mentioned. But the weakness in the current statute is really just that it only talks about the slow-moving vehicle emblem, which is the orange triangle that we're all familiar with. And as Mr. Kennedy stated, that triangle basically stipulates that the vehicle can't be operated above 25 miles an hour. And in fact, if it's on a vehicle moving faster than 25 miles an hour, you're actually violating the use of the symbol. Where the modernization really came in and what we were trying to do through the interim is add that speed identification symbol, which is kind of a modernization of that slow-moving vehicle standard. And what that did is exactly what Mr. Kennedy said, is that as equipment got better over time, they were able to manufacture them so that they could be moved more quickly. And really what that speed identification symbol does then is that it allows the triangle to still be used on all of the older vehicles. And then the new speed identification symbol, which is that circle with the speed indicator in it, allows for those manufacturers that are making vehicles that operate up to 40 miles an hour to use that symbol in addition to it. I think the reason it's important that we try to stay true to that standard is this equipment doesn't only exist in Wyoming. And I think the way that this bill was amended to simplify on the other side and raise that limit to 45 miles an hour would provide inconsistent messaging to drivers from other places. So if you go to, say, Ohio, and you see a farm implement with the triangle and the speed identification symbol, and then you drive through and you're in Wyoming and see that same thing, it's better for the traveling public if those laws are implemented in very similar fashions. Through the interim and then during the amendment in committee on the other side, Mr. Kennedy was able to work, as he mentioned, with the contractors and the trucking industry and us to make sure we were all comfortable with where that was at. And again, the key components of that were, we were still using the emblem that everyone's familiar with, which is the triangle, and we were simply modernizing to the current standard as established by the agricultural engineers. We were all very comfortable with how that came out. Again, I think the simplification that was done on the other side does cause some problems, again, because we're using that symbol then in a way that would be inconsistent with the way you would see it in any other jurisdiction. With that, certainly stand for any questions from you, sir.
So we would not have symbols that would, slow-moving vehicle symbols that are used on the nation's highways that would go up to 45.
Mr. Chairman, yes, but again, I think when you're talking about traveling cross country, it wouldn't be super common to see one of these on the interstate. It does occur occasionally, but not very often. But when you're on the secondary highways, it's very frequent. I mean, you guys know that from being in your areas. You see agricultural implements moved all the time. And when somebody comes from out of state, those symbols mean something to them. And it's best, I think, that we align our statutes to match what would be expected in another jurisdiction.
Representative Slagle, question.
Yeah, question I would have for you, Mr. Chairman, sorry. Question I would have for you is if we're putting the triangle symbol on the vehicle plus the speed symbol, it looks to me like the triangle symbol is good up to 40 miles an hour, whatever anyway. So it really doesn't make any difference what speed you're going below that, you got that slow moving symbol. Unless you get up close, you're not gonna read, at least I'm not gonna be able to read the speed deal on the other one. So, I mean, looks to me like just having the slow moving symbol be applicable to 40 or 45 down would be appropriate.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Slagle, again, I just am only referencing the ANSI standard and what that ANSI standard does. And I think that's really in respect of a lot of the older equipment still being around, is that it's a very clear indication, first and foremost, that triangle is indicating that this is a slow-moving vehicle first, right? So that gives you the first indication that maybe I ought to slow down or something in front of me is moving slowly. And then, as you mentioned, as you get closer, then you can see that and understand that, okay, this vehicle is actually rated to go up to 40. So I believe that triangle is really supposed to be that first point of reference to make you slow down. And then that 40 is really the exception rather than the rule. Over time, as equipment modernizes, it is possible that that standard changes. But as Mr. Kennedy mentioned, the way that the amendment is written, it would allow for, if they raise that limit from 40 to 45, this statute would actually accommodate that. It would adapt over time based on that standard.
Okay, Representative Davis?
Mr. Chairman, if I'm coming down the highway and I see a triangle up there, whether that little number over there to the side says 25 or 45, I slow down. Common sense would say slow down to whatever speed that vehicle in front of me is moving at, correct? Whether it says 25 or 45. But if I pull up there and I see this says 45, do I continue at 45 because the little round deal over there says 45, or do you, I'm confused. I don't know what I understand the standard and all that stuff, and if this is what has to be on the back of the equipment, but I don't understand the practical application of that. Because if that machine has got, say, a bale of hay in the front of it, it's got 45 over here, and the road's got some dips in it, and the operator of that particular piece of machinery is only going 25, I don't see the real, I guess I'm lost there.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Davis, certainly just because it says 40 doesn't mean you should drive 40 miles an hour into the back end of it, which I know was the hyperbole that we were going down there, and I understand where that was coming from. Again, I think the intent of the triangle is that has been in existence for a very, very, very long time and should indicate that you should slow down. I think, as with any vehicle, and if it's safe to pass, you can pass. You certainly, if somebody in front of you without this triangle is going 25 miles an hour, you obviously have to slow down for that vehicle as well. So I understand there's a certain amount of responsibility, I think, on both parties, right? The equipment operator and the motorist behind them. Again, all I'm trying to say is that there is an established standard that has been out there. I think it is well enough known throughout the country that using it inconsistently could cause a problem. I do think always when you're driving, you should use your judgment as far as how fast you ought to be going. But using these symbols as they're intended through the standard, I just think is the better practice on our roadways.
Representative Conrad?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would just note as an observation specifically, is this committee's, for lack of a better word, challenge to truly understand this. How are we going to be able to articulate to our respective constituents in, say, Robertson, Wyoming, what these new laws are? Because at some point we got to disseminate what the laws are for that rural rancher that has no idea outside of these changes. So I just want to, reinforce that. We need to truly better understand, as pointed out earlier by my great representative to the left of me. I mean, this shouldn't be that confusing, but it sure seems to be taking on an incredible challenge. And I want to be faced with telling our constituents what flag or what symbol or what circle and what mile an hour that is required. So I just want to ask for your help as we move forward, because we're going to need your help if this is successful to articulate to our respective ranchers and rural community. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Conrad, I think the question in there, I guess, is how could we help educate after the statute is passed? One of the things that we do have as a requirement, at least on the driver's license side, is that laws that impact the operation of motor vehicles typically every year on the renewal notices, we start sending those out. So we would probably include this in that because, again, this is an identification symbol. We would send out what the changes in that law are. I think additionally, I think through commercial carrier, it's possible to get some information out when we're at the ports about the change and the updates. And then, I mean, if the agricultural community wanted some assistance in trying to get some information out through the website, we could actually update our road and travel webpage to include these updates. I mean, we can do some things to disseminate this information. I think the YO Road website last year got like 2.2 billion hits. So it's well seen. So, I mean, we could put this in some locations, I think, that would help disseminate the information. And again, I think a lot of people that are in the ag community and are familiar with operating vehicles in ag communities in other states where these symbols already are in existence, they would understand what we're trying to do. So I think, again, we could educate our people at home, and then the people coming from out of state would have some additional resources as well.
So if we keep this consistent nationally, I live right in the corner of borders, Nebraska and Colorado, right there. Some of you live right against Montana. Those people traveling across the border then would know what the law, it'll be the same in Wyoming. Is what we're trying to do is conform to one national standard. Is that correct? Mr. Chairman? Well, let him answer a question here and we'll move on from there.
Mr. Chairman, Captain Wyrick with the Highway Patrol, thank you. Yes, we want to try and keep this as a standard. I've done my research with the states that surround us. They don't change the 25-mile-an-hour speed to the slow-moving vehicle emblem. So it's a standard amongst our other states, and the states where this particular bill was copied from was like Ohio and New York were basically the model to this speed indicator symbol. So it's basically an allowance that farmers and ranchers to allow them to exceed the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit that is the national standard of that slow-moving emblem sign.
And if we don't update to these standards, we're limited down to 25 under our present law.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, yes.
All right. Representative Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, on an older tractor piece of equipment, must you have the 25 speed, or if the tractor's old, can you just go under 25 without the symbol?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ullman, yes, you can. All that does is limit you to the speed of up to 25 miles per hour. And then, so yeah, you don't have to go up to 25, but you can't exceed 25. But the symbol is required, yes.
Davis?
One last question, and I understand what you're doing here, but what's the cost to the producer here to come into compliance? You know, what's going to be the additional cost do you see for our farmers and ranchers out there to have to come into compliance with this law or statute?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Davis, I think as far as the slow-moving vehicle symbol goes, I don't know that I've encountered an agricultural implement that hasn't already done the triangle portion of this. I believe the speed identification symbol, as it goes forward, will actually probably come from the manufacturer, or as Mr. Kennedy said, you may be able to go buy it. I believe he would be better able to answer that question in the event that it's actually something somebody wants to do after the fact. I believe most equipment today would actually come with it installed, so it would be very hard for me to tell you what the additional cost would be. Sorry.
Right, I can speak to some of that. On the old ones, you end up just buying another triangle, and I'm pretty sure you could buy these speed limit triangles as well. The old ones were like $5. So the cost to the producer wasn't that great, but the greater cost is the liability that anybody in agriculture would have without being compliant with. We may not adopt federal law and may have to stay with the 25 if we don't get something ironed out here. Representative Davis.
Well, that brings up another question. If they're not in compliant, what's the fine?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Davis, without having my bond schedule here readily available, I mean, the minimum for that, I believe, is well, I'd be remiss. I don't have my bond scheduled to look that up as to it, but there is a bond for failing to display. It's an equipment violation that wouldn't affect driver's license or anything. It would just be failing to display the sign.
So I think the greater cost that we might ought to bring up is a liability question. And you're not in compliance with what we should have on slow-moving vehicles, and then you're in an accident, and then you'll find out what the real cost might be. But yeah, other questions? And I believe it's important on us, the Ag Committee, to try to get this ironed out as close as we can to correct I empathize with the 45-mile-an-hour deal, but and I'll vouch for people can figure out how to make a 25-mile-per-hour tractor go faster. You just kick it out of gear and wreck it going down the highway at 50 because you're teenagers. I speak from the neighbor's experience. Senator.
Chairman Eklund, members of the committee, I apologize. I didn't realize how many new folks were really on the committee, and obviously it's hard to get up to speed, and I understand the confusion. So I'll try to simplify it as I heard it when I heard it the first time during the interim. The attempt, the need for this is because equipment has become improved, and the said new equipment can go faster than 25 miles an hour. The said new equipment that's being made comes with speed identification symbols on it. No one has to put anything on it. It's a manufacturer's thing. So it's already taken care of. So you need the slow moving vehicle sign plus this. The attempt in the Senate, where I am at sometimes, was to simplify it and say, at the end of the day, the new equipment that we're talking about already has a speed identification symbol on it that identifies its maximum speed. And in my mind, that was always for law enforcement, so they knew what the speeds were. So that was kind of taken care of. So you didn't have to go off and buy another symbol. They already come equipped. They have the lights on it. They have all this stuff that we're talking about in here already equipped on it. So this was merely to help out the ag community in dealing with new vehicles and traveling faster than the said 25 miles an hour currently limiting, our travel here in the state of Wyoming. The question is, how do we do that? So the Senate's position, obviously, what the engrossed version was, take a simpler way and just say, okay, 45 miles an hour, the cap, the machines actually will come with all the things you need on them to do that, the new ones. And the old ones that can't go that fast, can't go that fast. So they're speed limited. The questions about combinations, I think maybe is a valid one, making clear that the combination is limited to the slowest moving piece or capable piece in the train of equipment. Obviously that's something, to make sure that it's done the way you like it. But I yield to the deference of this committee. Obviously, it's in your hands, it's in your body. I can just try to help to explain how we got here, and hopefully I did a better job than I did the first time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
Okay, questions, committee? I guess I'd have one for YDOT. So the bill as it is, how does that affect? But the Senate version doesn't get rid of the symbols. It doesn't get rid of what comes from the manufacturer. How does the extra 5 miles per hour, how does that affect what we're trying to do? And are we put out of compliance with the federal highway regulations and what have you? Because I'm not sure I'm clear on that. I don't know if I'm guessing the committee might not be too. Go ahead, Taylor.
Mr. Chairman, and Dan may have to back me a little here too. This equipment by default is actually not designed to be on the roads, right? So the federal government really doesn't apply most of their federal motor vehicle safety standards to it. But that is also, I think, why you have a pretty strict standard on what that triangle means, which is again the 25 mile an hour speed limit. And then the speed identification symbol, as over time has come to mean something within the ag community. I think the only risk that I see as the bill sits engrossed is, again, that we would have symbols being used in a manner in Wyoming that would not be common across other jurisdictions. I think that could cause some issues with the motoring public. I think as amended and proposed by Mr. Kennedy, that is really more the intent and the way it was worked through the interim. And I believe that everyone was pretty comfortable with how that came out of the interim. The rest of that, I believe, is really probably a policy decision for this body, and we would have to figure out how to react on the enforcement, the education, and the operation side.
Presently, if we increase by 5 miles per hour on the Wyoming side of things, and you're able to implement that law, there wouldn't be vehicles, more than likely wouldn't be vehicles coming from manufacturers that are set at 45. So going 45 would not be, it isn't going to happen. They're just not out there. If we leave it as it is, limited to 45, and we suddenly have manufacturers that can build implements that can go faster, and I can see that happening. I thought that was coming down the pike until everybody slowed it down about 10 years ago because the speed proved to be a problem. If we pass the bill as it is, we're limited down to 45, and manufacturers might say they could be going 50, 55. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the way you explain that is 100% correct. And again, I think that's why I would fall back to that standard, in that standard can be updated over time. The bill as amended, as proposed by Mr. Kennedy, would actually allow for, as that standard is updated, our statutes to automatically be updated. So as those advances in equipment occurred, our statute would already be able to adopt them. You would not have to come back and adjust that number.
Questions, committee? Are we, Representative Conrad?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would just respectfully ask for Senator Kolb's opinion as it relates to this amendment.
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Eklund and Representative Conrad. I think first I will just say the deference of this committee is important. It's another house. Number one. Number two, in my opinion, I think it does solve maybe some open-ended questions about just like the combination vehicle issues. I think that's true. However, I think I'll just throw out a suggestion here. When you talk about speed and being limited to the 45, some language could be inserted in there that would say, or the manufacturer's maximum speed rating. And then no matter what it is in the future, it would change. I think it's self-correcting, though. The Senate's position, ironically, is simple, and everything is self-correcting. I think the question about other states and their ratings, and our ratings, frankly, I think is irrelevant in my opinion, because it's a slow-moving vehicle. Rather you're going 45 or 25 or 20, kind of irrelevant. You know what you're getting. In the speed ratings that we talked about, well, they're on the vehicles. When you buy them, you get all that stuff's on there, all the lights and all the things you need. And for everybody who has that, then you can go faster. And obviously, everybody will see the symbol, I guess, once you get up to it. But I will emphasize one thing, the increased speed is safety. If you travel faster than, say, 10 miles an hour, your time to close on the vehicle in front of you is more if you go faster, because you're more closer to your own speed. So it's a safety issue. It's a safety issue. I guess I implore the committee to work this bill, move it forward, because it is needed, and there's an opportunity here to make a change that we can that would help our people who are hauling this types of equipment. So I just say that I think there's a simplicity to the slow-moving symbol and saying the maximum speed's 40. Actually, the maximum speeds really, honestly, is what the machine can travel at, in a total combination rated. So I think that I don't have an issue with that. Honestly, I did. I thought, well, maybe that was too simple. But after thinking about it and listening to the comments here, I've kind of changed my opinion. That I thought, well, maybe I'm more on board with the Senate version than I probably was before. No, it came through committee. I hope that sheds some light on at least my thoughts, and appreciate the chance to comment, Mr. Chairman.
Well, your opinions are important because the Senate and the House will have to agree on this eventually in a conference committee. So what we do will make a lot of difference. Representative Davis.
Mr. Chair, in your opinion, Senator, is this a proposed friendly amendment? That's just your opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Davis. I'll just say, sitting here testifying as Senator Kolb, I don't have that much of an issue with it. I think it goes back closer to the original version. But I do think, I'll go back to what I said a little earlier, I do think it's simpler to say you can go up to, in my opinion, whatever the safe operating speed is for said equipment. Instead of, because the machines are going to have it, all the stuff's going to be on them. So the slow moving symbol and the rest of the stuff's, I think, superfluous. I don't understand, but I don't have heartburn over the amendment. I think it goes back to the interim committee work. And I thought it was, obviously I voted for it coming out of interim committee. So thank you for the opportunity to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for coming here. Representative Banks. And we've got other Senate Ag Committee members that can chime in whenever they would like to as well. So go ahead, Representative Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just echo the words of the good senator. I mean, for myself and most farmers I know, we like things simple. The bill as it is right now is simple and allows for the changes we need to have take place. I see adding another sign on there as redundant, and I see it as an opportunity for an already targeted industry to be targeted on the roads even more and cited for going 5 miles an hour more than what they might have gone. So where this stands now, I appreciate what the Senate did to the bill to simplify it for a industry that like things simple.
Okay, any other questions? Do we have other public testimony?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Be on hand. We may have more questions for you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Sheila Furch with the Wyoming Trucking Association, and I'm speaking on behalf of my members today, as well as members of the Associated General Contractors Association. Ms. Ligursky isn't able to be here. Mr. Rossetti mentioned that we worked with Mr. Kennedy and WYDOT early on when the first bill was proposed with an amendment, because our concerns basically, and I am not qualified to talk about farm implements. Let me just throw that right out there to begin with. What our concern is that there was kind of a effort, not an effort, it was just unintended consequences that were sweeping in special mobile equipment. And you'll see that referenced not only in the engrossed bill, but in the original bill. And when the original bill was proposed over on the other side, we worked closely with Mr. Kennedy to take out that reference to special mobile equipment. There are references in the engrossed bill, specifically in paragraph H on page 2, that talk about the current standards and specifications of the American Society of Agriculture and Biological Engineers. Specifically, that applies to farm equipment. But there are also then references above in a couple of the paragraphs that pull in that special mobile equipment again. And that's our concern. Mr. Kennedy's amendment that you'll be considering today removes that special mobile equipment, which we're comfortable with, because we think this is an issue for the farm implements on the highway, and are concerned about using that language for special mobile equipment. And just as a sidebar for that, there is not a definition for special mobile equipment in the statute already. That reference is being used, but there is not, and has been used, because some of that is old language, but there is not a specific definition for special mobile equipment. In some research that Ms. Legursky did prior to the amendment being proposed on the other side, the definition that's widely accepted for special mobile equipment is generally defined as construction vehicles that are designed to be used primarily in road maintenance and road construction.
So the amendment made on the Senate side brings the construction people back into this, which is designed for agriculture and not them, correct?
Mr. Chairman, some of the language is already in statute that refers to special mobile equipment, and we were able to take that out in the original amendment on the Senate side, but now it's back in the engrossed copy.
Okay. And the amendment proposed to bring it back to where it was will remove that.
That's
and
correct,
get you out
Mr.
of it.
Chairman.
And your organization will be more
We-
comfortable with
We
it.
are much more comfortable with that, yes.
Okay, committee questions? All right, any other public testimony?
Mr. Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Sitting in support of the bill, it works. The bill will work okay. What the amendment does is make it a little bit more specific, and as was pointed out, it can go up, you can drive up to the speed that your vehicle, your tractor, your sprayer, whatever is rated at. That signage comes from the manufacturer, so it's nothing that has to be added. And then with the being limited to the speed of the lowest rated vehicle, if you're towing something, so if your grain cart's only rated for 25, you can only do 25, and you have to have the SMV sign on, current situation. What beautiful thing about this amendment is that as things change and things get faster, if there's equipment that can do 50 instead of 45, this law will automatically update, and you won't have to, or your successors won't have to sit through this again. It's a very simple concept that gets complicated quickly, and I understand your confusion. Until Mr. Kennedy very slowly explained it to me, it took me a while to understand it, but I'm comfortable with the amendment. I think it improves the bill, and a big thing that it does is that as things change in the future, this law will automatically update, and it won't have to be revisited. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd sit for any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Committee, questions? So you're comfortable with the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, yes, sir.
If we adopted this amendment, then what the Senate is trying to do with the 45 mile per hour, that will happen automatically as equipment is able to progress up to that speed.
Mr. Chairman, as I understand the amendment, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Moline. Other public testimony? Okay. Chairman Steinmetz, welcome to our committee. Did you have anything to add? Okay. Anyone online? Okay, so we're finished with public testimony. You just stay on hand. We may have other questions. I run my committee that way. So, committee, what's your pleasure? Okay, it's been moved by Slagle. Seconded or not seconded? Seconded by Conrad. Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
as I look over this amendment, I think it answers all the questions.
Okay,
And it's ongoing, like it's been said. I mean, somebody with, this says that, I think, if I understand things right, you couldn't go over 25 with a slow-moving vehicle sign before. Now you can, as your equipment goes faster. And this is, as I read over it, covers us now, covers us down the future, and we don't have to revisit it now. And it will, this is simpler bill, there's no question about that. Anyway, I don't see anything wrong with this. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Winter, is that you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Kolb, and this question goes to you. If it was my understanding that this amendment is basically what the original bill was, or the original law was. What influenced the Senate to change it? And if did they have all the information that we have today from the highway department and so forth, or did they just out of the blue make up this new bill? Could you explain that?
Mr. Chairman, Eklund, Representative Winter. Well, I could say I plead the fifth, but it happened once it came out of committee, and there was amendments put on there, and it turned into what it is. I've got to represent the committee's will. I can just say it came out of committee, supported, fully supported, and then it changed on the floor. I think there was an attempt trying to make it simpler, which is always good. I guess I'll say the old story that someone told me a long time ago, it is what it is. So I really wouldn't want to say much more than that here. But of course, I'm all right with the way it came out originally out of the interim committee work.
That help you? I'm going to kind of defend what happened too, because I think you try to simplify things and you make them more complicated. I got to go down here first. We got more questions, so.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative
thank you. Just
Conrad.
a question for clarity. Is there amendment on the table or not?
No, there is not.
Thank you.
Did we move the bill? We moved the bill. No, okay, we moved the bill. So what we're discussing is probably the amendment. Is there any interest in this amendment by the committee to move it and second it? Yes, Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the amendment as proposed to Senate File 74 on, do you want me to spell it out or?
Nope, second,
Okay,
we need a second. It's been moved and seconded by Conrad. Go ahead, Representative Davis.
I believe, in my opinion, after reading the bill and then inserting this into it, does bring clarity back to the bill. Sometimes keeping it simple, I'm all in favor of, but I was lost to start with. Now I'm found.
Okay. Any other discussion on the amendment? Okay, Representative Banks.
I was lost and I'm still lost, so I think I'm gonna stick with the original bill as it's simplified. And just adding the ability to be able to say, oh, that tractor has a 25-mile sign on it, but it's going 30, and being able to stop and give them a ticket. I think simplifying things for our farmers is the best way to go. It's a universal symbol. The triangle is slow moving. And I think we try and mess with that, it's just gonna bring us into the weeds even further. So I'm for the bill as it is now.
Any further discussion? All right, Representative Slagle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would tend to agree with Representative Banks. I mean, I look at this amendment and we see all kinds of references to 25 miles an hour in here. And yet then we see the deal for a speed identification symbol. I think it's simpler if we just raise our speed limit for the slow moving sign up to 45 or 40 or whatever we choose. And any speed from that speed down is legal for a vehicle with slow moving emblem. Thank you.
Representative Davis.
Mr. Chair, I think a lot of this slow-moving vehicle depends upon the operator and what he's got behind him or in front of him. So all this does is give us the vision for those that got faster tractors than you. I mean, but, it just brings a little clarity into that. So I think, a lot depends upon the operator and the piece of equipment, but I'm in favor of this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna speak as a producer. If I can figure out, we bought this new tractor. New, I mean, it's still over 10 years old, but it's new to us. If I can figure out how to operate that thing, I can certainly figure out the speeds at which I'm safe driving. And I think it's probably not that confusing. I do have concerns that if we don't pass this, what happens to the liability of those producers if they're going at a speed that's not recommended by the manufacturer and they're in an accident. And most of us don't want to find out whether the insurance was good enough to cover those kinds of things. But I do think that if we're pretty much compliant with what the rest of the country is saying, our attorneys might be able to make a pretty good case in any situation we might get into. Representative Conrad.
Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, can we call for questions with regards to the amendment that's been on the table?
All right. Are you finished?
I'm fine on this. I want to bring an amendment after this amendment.
Okay. Are we ready to vote on the amendment that's on the table? Okay, all those in favor of the proposed amendment brought to us by Mr. Kennedy, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, raise your hands. I think it failed.
I thought it was 50-50.
Okay, all those in favor, raise your hands. Okay, opposed? All right.
50-50.
Okay. Other discussion on the bill. Representative Almond.
Mr. Chairman, on page 2, I'd like to I move that we strike lines 20, 21, 22, and 23, because I see no need for that to be there. And you do a little study on the American Society of Agriculture and Biological Engineers. That's not an American society, that's a global society. And I think we have enough global regulations, and it does nothing for the bill. So I ask for consideration to remove that.
Been moved to remove H, right, correct?
Page 2, lines 20, 21, 22, and 23.
Okay, do we have
It has nothing to do with the bill.
Okay, do we have a second on that?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Winter. Any discussion on that? Okay, All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, raise your hands. All those in favor? There's 3 opposed. 3, I'll oppose it too. This American Society of Agriculture and Biological Engineers is probably the organization. I just believe we probably need to leave it in there. Any further discussion on Representative Slagle?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would propose an amendment to go along with what was removed earlier, the special mobile equipment language. So it'd be striking on page 1, line 15, after husbandry, strike and special. And page 2, line 1, mobile equipment. And then page 2, line 9, or starting on line 8, after husbandry, strike or units towed by special mobile equipment on line 9. That clear to the secretaries?
Okay. Does that, I'm guessing that might satisfy, yes, Representative Allred.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Representative Slagle, would you please, are you working off the blue sheet?
Yes, I am.
Would you do that again, please?
Yes, I can. So page 1, line 15, after husbandry, strike and special. Then on page 2, line 1, strike mobile equipment. Then go down to page 2, line 9, strike special, or actually, excuse me, go back up to line 8, start after husbandry, or strike or units towed by, and line 9, special mobile equipment.
Representative Allemand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Swagel, what is your thinking behind this amendment?
Well, it was just, Mr. Chairman, it was go along with the recommendation brought by the gal that was here presenting just a little bit ago, and I don't remember her name.
Mrs. Fordish brought it forward from the contractors, correct? Not the trucking industry. Yep. Okay. Any other discussion on that amendment? All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, I think that passed. Raise a hand, let's make sure. All those in favor of that amendment that strikes mobile equipment out of it, raise your hands. Okay, opposed? Okay, so it didn't pass. I'm not hearing well. All right, that amendment does not pass. Any further discussion on the bill? Okay, Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to know how this is going to fit in with the Department of Transportation's concerns about traveling down the highway with as many people we have here from other states coming through. And it looks to me like we've made a mess of the bill, to be honest with you. I don't see us where we've really made any progress in making this better. So if somebody could explain that to me, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I can answer part of it. If we leave this bill as it is, we'll probably be the only state in the country with this 45 mile per hour limit or insertion there. So when I travel to Nebraska, I'll go into Nebraska law, which will be, would have been the original bill, probably the same in in Colorado, can't speak for sure that that's what'll happen, but we'll just be somewhat inconsistent. People traveling across those lines with equipment will just have to be aware that the law is not consistent statewide, state to state. Representative Banks.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought it was just kind of a universal thing. If you see that triangle, then that means slow-moving vehicle. So I don't understand how traveling across state lines affects what that symbol's meaning is. If someone could help me clarify that.
Representative Davis.
I think the point is here, we're discussing what we operate as tractors, but there's some new track machines out there, these Challengers and stuff like that, and they sickle down the road at 45 miles an hour. And so if we don't move something that allows us to address that 45 mile an hour speed limit, they're in violation. Because they've got the slow moving symbol, if I'm following this right, on the back, which only allows them not to exceed 25 miles an hour. So if we pass this bill, that alludes to the ability of them to successfully travel at 45 miles an hour, then they won't be in trouble from the law because they're not breaking the law. But if they're not traveling at 45, if they're only traveling at 30, say due to road conditions, they're still incompliant.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I would agree with you. I was just, there's some questions about how we wouldn't be in compliance. I agree with you. This, if we pass the bill, I think we'll be in compliance. So my questions of if we pass it and still not in compliance was where I was going with that question.
Representative Alderman.
This bill states, Mr. Chairman, this bill states that 45 will be the new upper speed for the triangle. So if you have your Challenger that will go 40, you will not be out of compliance with this bill the way I understand it. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, are we ready to vote? Okay, roll call, please.
I have a question.
Sure, yes, go ahead, Mr. Secretary. Mark, go ahead.
We're only voting on the blue page, not the amendment because that failed. And there were no other amendments to this. You're just voting on this.
Right.
Correct? Okay, thank you.
As it came out of the Senate, the engrossed version.
Okay, thank you. Representative Alderman.
Aye.
Representative Allred.
Aye.
Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Conrad.
Aye.
Representative Craigo.
He'll get here later. He's testifying in another committee, so just hold his vote open.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Slagle.
Aye.
Representative Winter.
No.
Chairman Eklund.
No. Okay,
6-2,
so the bill fails.
passes.
Oh, passes, I'm sorry. Passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. All right. Next bill for our consideration is Senate File 68. Senator Hicks, welcome to the Ag Committee meeting.
Can't have it.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead when you're ready.
All right, Mr. Chairman and members of the House Ag Committee, I bring to you today is Senate File 68, Prescriptive Easements for Water Conveyances. This is the bill that the Select Water Committee worked a couple of years on. Actually, it started 2 years ago, and then with all the interruptions with special session and COVIDs, and then being flooded with federal dollars and another special session and stuff, we kind of laid it back until we got through all of that, and then we brought it back this last interim and then worked on this bill. Members of the committee. So let me first provide a little bit of background and then a little bit of information, and we'll dive into the bill, members of the committee. So one of the things that we're all aware of, we're seeing Wyoming's growing, and we're seeing quite a bit of subdivision, and even not necessarily always subdivision, just a transition of landowners. You know, ranches are being bought for recreational properties, second homes, subdivisions. We all have some nature of that. Well, in a lot of cases, there's existing ditches that cross these properties. And then the new owners, often not familiar with the traditions and the customs and in legal precedents, don't want anybody to come onto their property and maintain a ditch. And as you all know, water reacts to gravity. Most times the point of diversions are not on the property that's irrigated, it's someplace way upstream. So we're just starting to see, and I think it's going to become more and more of a problem. So what your Select Water Committee started to do is look at is how do we go about protecting the interest of both the landowner and the water rights holder and the owner of the ditch. And so this is the genesis of this issue that you're all going to grapple with at some point in time. So with that, Mr. Chairman, you know the nature of the problem. So now let's talk about the nature of the issue that we're dealing with. And so, Mr. Chairman, I know you probably all don't have your constitutions here, but we have this thing in Article 8. And Article 8 deals with waters. So in the Constitution under Article 8, let me flip over that, Mr. Chairman. It just says water is state property. The water of all natural streams, springs, lakes, or collections of still water within the boundaries of the state are hereby declared the property of the state. So the reason that's important, Mr. Chairman, it's property. It's real property. It belongs to the state. It's the state's property. But through the application of a water rights to the state of Wyoming and then granted a water right, whether it's appropriate or adjudicated or not, the state conveys to you as a landowner the use of the state's property. We call that a usufructuary property right. You use it, it becomes your property. So that's the nature of what we're dealing here. We're dealing with a property right vested in you as the owner of that permit to use that state property. And de facto, and there's not a bank in the world or a court that doesn't recognize that as a legal property right for the owner of those water rights. So that's very important that we're dealing with the property right here. And then you're dealing with a conveyance mechanism for that property across somebody else's property. So the nature of the issue that we're trying to grapple with is what property right interest do you have as a water right holder versus you as the property right holder of the land? And so, Mr. Chairman, this is not a new or unique situation. In fact, we have a long litany of Supreme Court rulings and Attorney General's opinions, not just in this state, but across the West. And so what this bill does is go in there and take a number of those. First, it goes in and it takes historic practice. What has been the tradition, not just in Wyoming, but west-wide with the states that operate under prior appropriation doctrine. So what's the historic practices that we've had? And how do we use those practices? And then it also brings in an Attorney General's opinion from 1965 that deals with this issue of whose property is it and how do those two property rights interplay. And then we bring in a couple of the Supreme Court cases that have ruled over the years on this issue of who has the greater property right. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the nature of the issue. This is why this goes into Title 34, which deals with easements. This is not a water law issue. It's a property rights issue. We're just talking about the mechanism to convey those water rights, but we're not talking about water rights. Title 41 deals with water. The reason is because this has always been a civil case. You're suing your neighbor, Mr. Chairman. And that's where all the court cases that have come, and if you end up in a situation, so you as the ditch owner that conveys your water right, which is your property, has an easement or does not have an easement, as the case is usually where the litigation comes, is your only remedy right now is to end up in a lawsuit, go to district court. It's a civil case. It's one landowner suing another landowner. So what we're trying to do is say, look, let's codify the existing traditions, the opinions of the attorney generals based on the historic understanding of Western water rights and those Supreme Court cases. So that's what the bill does, Mr. Chairman, and now that's the nature of the issue. This is the proposed remedy based on that. And then just to purview a little bit, the idea here is put something in statute. So when these issues arise, because what typically happens on these issues, the first thing they do is the two landowners go to the Board of Control, and the Board of Control will say, not a water rights issue, folks, it's a property rights issue. And your only remedy is you hire an attorney, and then you hire an attorney, and you go to court, and you spend a lot of money, and they come back and say, well, the Supreme Court ruled in 1898, this is what the law says. Or the Supreme Court, but you've got to go to district court to ferret that out. So we hope that by putting this in statutes, it's a clear guidance for both the water rights holder that holds the water rights for that ditch and the property owner. You can go to the statutes now. We hope to also, in those cases, it does not necessarily preclude litigation. But what it does do is say, here's your legal rights under the law. This is what the courts have said, and provide some codification of what the courts have already said. The idea is hopefully what we do is ratchet down litigation, one landowner. And the reason I think that's important is we continue to see, you guys have all debated it, escalating property values, people just coming in and buying a wonderful piece of Wyoming, and they have tremendous financial means to do so. And so, in one way, I look at this bill as a way to just say, look, we're not going to allow you as a very wealthy individual to come in here and bludgeon somebody with litigation or financially bankrupt them if we have the opportunity to provide clear guidance through statutes. And so, Mr. Chairman, that's how we got here today, and that's what I'm to present to you at this point in time. So, Mr. Chairman, prescriptive easements for water, as I've already, so on page 1, if you notice, this goes into Title 34. This deals with easements, and we create the new section for a prescriptive easement, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, Mr. Chairman, as to what constitutes a prescriptive easement. So these are prescriptive easements, and then if you flip over to page 2, Mr. Chairman, this is where a prescriptive easement would come into play, and this is mostly, so the 10-year limit, so if you've used your ditch for 10 years, it's been assumed that there's some, that's kind of what the most states look at. If some practice has been in place on your property for 10 years, you were aware of it. So it's continuous. So, Mr. Chairman, so under this is where you would get a prescriptive easement versus one where you just go and you agree to an agreement and then you survey it and then it's an agreed upon easement and then you put it on title of land. The first litmus test that you have to do is that this ditch had to be in place for 10 years. And that's been accepted practices pretty much across the West in many states, even for other issues other than just water rights conveyance mechanisms. So the first test is it has to have been in place for over 10 years. The second test, it has to be continuous and uninterrupted, and that's continuous and uninterrupted in the context of water rights. We don't irrigate 365 days a year. The traditional use is during that season. So as long as you've continuously used that ditch for more than 10 years, and it's been uninterrupted, and again, the question came up in the Senate, well, if I don't use it 1 year, well, under the water rights statutes, you have a period of 5 years before you could be, somebody could file for a petition to abandon your water rights. So consistent with Wyoming water law, I think the courts may say uninterrupted doesn't mean that just because you didn't use it for part of the season or one season. Our statutes have already contemplated a 5 years for a number of reasons, which you may or may not use that water right. So that would still be in context of continuous and uninterrupted, Mr. Chairman. It has to be open and notorious. And what open and notorious means in the case of the law means that it was available for pretty much everybody to see. And notorious means it wasn't because you were granted the right to go onto that property, but it's open. Everybody could see that you were maintaining that ditch, you're irrigating out of that ditch. There's water that flows in that ditch. It's open for everybody to see it. And notorious just means that, Mr. Chairman, that it wasn't a granted easement. So you don't necessarily have a recorded easement like you would on a road. That's the notorious component. The third component is hostile. This was changed in the Senate from adverse. If you get 10 attorneys in a room, they'll tell you it should be 10 different things, whether it's hostile and adverse. But for in the context of what we're doing here, it just means that it wasn't granted by the landowner, that in fact, you were using this without the landowner's permission. So there's 4 tests that you have to meet to go in and now get a prescriptive easement. This law, and again, this is codifying court cases, AG's opinion, and historic use. So there's 4 components that would come into play if you're going to do a prescriptive easement. Number 1, Mr. Chairman, the ditch and the use of the ditch had to be in place for more than 10 years. Number 2, it had to be continuous and uninterrupted. Number 3, it had to be open and notorious. And then number 3 is it has to be hostile. So if you meet those 4 tests, you will now have a prescriptive easement. You'll have to meet those 4 tests, Mr. Chairman. So then if we go down to subsection B, it says, if a water right user establishes paragraph A1 through 2, in this section, there is a rebuttable presumption that the use has been hostile under paragraph A3. This just means, Mr. Chairman, this is kind of direction for the courts to say, you have a prescriptive easement. The rebuttable presumption means is they have to prove you do not. That's all that says. So if you get into a contested situation where you're going to claim that under the laws of Wyoming now that you have a prescriptive easement, somebody can come in and say, well, no, it wasn't hostile, it wasn't adverse. Or the rebuttable presumption is they have to prove that that's not the case. The courts will say, well, that is the case. You need to prove to us. So it's I don't know the legal terminology for the burden of proof, Mr. Chairman, is now back on that landowner to prove that you hadn't met these litmus tests. So, Mr. Chairman, we go on to subsection C. The holder of a prescriptive easement for water conveyance is established in subsection A of B may. These are the things that are permissive under the prescriptive easement. So once you've established those 4 components, these are now brings in the things as what you can do under that prescriptive easement. You can't just go do whatever you want, right? It's somebody else's property that you're now going on to. Mr. Chairman, so under that notice, so we get to number 1, you may, if you can establish those 4 components, you can file a notice of a prescriptive easement, and then it brings in 34-1-141, which is the other provisions under our easements code, that you can go into the county clerk's office and file a prescriptive easement for this water conveyance system on somebody else's property. That's all that does, Mr. Chairman. We go over to page 3, it talks about, this brings in the concept of now you're going into somebody's property to maintain your ditch, your canal. So it says, and this also provides some protection for those other landowners. And it says access use to maintain or repair the water conveyance located within the easement in accordance with law. Maintenance as used as this section shall include the right of the holder of the prescriptive easement to temporarily remove infrastructure in or spanning the water conveyance system, provided that. In other words, it's not uncommon to have people that have culverts, bridges, over canals and ditches and stuff. This goes in there and this section, and so that's the access that you have the right under a prescriptive easement to maintain your ditch. But if you need to, so it's really common, and what we're seeing probably more than anything else is people fencing. Subdivisions come in and you get fence after fence after fence after fence across these ditches and canals or water pipelines. It's the ability to get in there and maintain that. But it comes in here, and here's the protections for those landowners. Before the temporary removal of the maintenance of the infrastructure that landowner uses for ingress and egress. So this is getting in and out of their property. It could be to their home. This is what this anticipates, Mr. Chairman, that the holder of the prescriptive easement, which would be the water right holder, shall provide reasonable written notice given the extent and the estimate of time for the maintenance, but no case shall notice be provided less than 48 hours before any temporary removal. So you got to tell them, I'm going to pull your culvert out of your ditch that goes into your road or into your house. You got to do that within 48 hours. Also brings in, Mr. Chairman, on subsection B, any temporary removal of a landowner's infrastructure for the purposes of water conveyance systems maintenance shall be reasonable and minimize any burden on the landowner. Just says you have a duty to those landowners. If you're going to go remove something, don't go out of your way to create a burden or an impediment to the use and enjoyment of their property. Mr. Chairman, if we go on to subsection D and then is used in this section, it brings in the definition of water conveyance. And you have a proposed amendment before you that we'll talk about, Mr. Chairman. We worked the bill. It just brings in a definition of water conveyance, means a man-made canal, ditch, drain, ditch, pipeline that conveys water for agricultural purposes, a definition for water user. And then under subsection E, Mr. Chairman, this is where we bring in what we would call more historical use, and what some of the courts have ruled on us. On the width of a prescriptive easement shall be for the size and volume of water of the conveyance system. In other words, if you've got a little ditch that conveys 1 second foot of water that irrigates 5 acres, you don't need a 330 cat excavator to get in there and do it. It's got to be appropriate to the size. This is consistent with some of the court rulings. It just says you have a right to maintain it. You just can't go without. But what we've tried to do is provide guidance with this. So that's the first percent. It's reasonable and sufficient width for equipment suitable for the operation and maintenance of the water conveyance system. That easement will be from the center line of the conveyance system, but may vary from each side of the center line to reasonably facilitate the size of the equipment, placement of the dredge material, and the topography of the conveyance system and traverses. Mr. Chairman, we all know that you have ditches that sometimes that are on steep hillsides that you can only get to one side. We also know you have ditches that you can't stockpile on the road that you need to access, that you need to reach across the ditch. So under those circumstances, what we tried to do is minimize the width of that prescriptive easement for strictly the purpose of maintenance. Rather than saying, well, for this size, it's 20 feet, and this size is 30 feet, and this size it's 50 feet, and then you do them down the center line may not always facilitate the ability to, particularly on steep hillsides. So this allows that prescriptive easement only for the purposes of maintenance to kind of move back and forth across that center line. So Mr. Chairman, then if we flip over to the next page, I think we're through there. It deals with the state engineer's office, Mr. Chairman, and state engineer's office already publishes this on their website. And this document was the guidance for most everything that's in this bill, because it goes through and it provides what the court cases were, what the courts have historically said. It is an absolutely phenomenal document. So we're taking the information out of here and bringing this into the statutes, and then some of the historic practices. Mr. Chairman, and it just says, if we get to the bottom of subsection 8, again, with the idea to notify any new landowners that are coming into the state that all real estate transaction involving property through which a water conveyance system passes shall include notice of this document. And this document means when you sell a ranch or subdivide and somebody buys it, the real estate agents have to provide you notice that this document exists. So again, information is the best thing for both parties. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the bill. I have a couple amendments. State's Chief Water Attorney, Chris Brown, is here today. He's provided me with a series of what I think are very important amendments to the bill, and then you have the one amendment that I brought to Mr. Chairman. So that's the bill, gentlemen. I'd stand for any questions.
Representative Conrad, we'll go down this.
Chairman, I can thank you. Majority Floor Leader Hicks, thank you sincerely. This is a couple of friendly questions for you specifically. I think the last document that I have as it relates to the ditch easements and rights is 2009. Is that the one you're referencing first off? That you just showed?
Mr. Chairman, could I get you to speak into the microphone?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I
Thank
forgot
you.
my hearing aids this morning.
No, I'm a quiet guy. My first question, in fact, all these are friendly questions. The first one residing with is your ditch easement document. Is that, with last revision that I have is 2009. Is that the one that you were citing this morning as well?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Thank you. Follow-up question. I think this addresses, in 1956, there was Haynes versus Galleys. Wyoming Supreme Court case that actually acknowledged this failure in terms of prescriptive easements. Will this bring that together in some 60 years later to help us get through this without further litigation?
Mr. Chairman, that is absolutely correct.
Thank you.
Representative Slagle.
One question for you, Senator Hicks. On page 3, talking about notice, on line 13, it says, in no case shall notice be provided less than 48 hours. Should that be not less than 48 hours?
Mr. Chairman, are you working off the engrossed version or the original version?
Yes, the engrossed version.
And so you said on page 3, line
13.
Shall notice be provided not less than 48 hours. Correct.
Okay,
So we would need to bring that.
bring an amendment
Yeah.
for that. Okay, that's what I was questioning.
Mr. Chairman, other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Floor Leader Hicks, I'm smiling all over as you're talking about this because of the old ditches that were used 100 years ago or haven't been used. And now we got new people moving in. Now they want to use the ditches. But if it's used 10 years prior, no matter if it's been abandoned for 50 years, they can still reinstitute and generate that to bring water to their property that they have now purchased. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if that would be correct. Under the prescriptive easements, we talked about that it has to be uninterrupted and continuous. And again, under Wyoming water law, and if you have the ability to not use that water right for 5 years, you cannot use it for a long time. But if you don't use that for 5 years, it is available for abandonment. If somebody can demonstrate that they can use that water, they can file an abandonment on that water right. So to the specific issue that you're asking, I don't know. I think this would be something that would end up in the determination. So if you've got a ditch that's been there for 50 years and has not been used, even though they may have a water right to it, I don't know that this bill contemplates a remedy for that situation. Because I think it gets back to, was it continuous and uninterrupted? And I don't know the answer to that. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't know
Yeah.
that this would address that issue, but I don't know that it would. At least it sets a framework.
So
So, Mr.
committee,
Chairman,
and-
what I would encourage somebody to do in that scenario would be to hurry up and irrigate out of that ditch for a year or two.
well, we have the state engineer's office here too, and I think they can address, the question is kind of out of the scope of what we're trying to do here.
It is, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
It's a water rights issue.
Yeah, so, and we don't have much time, so we'll try not to answer anything outside of the scope of the bill, so that maybe we can get through this thing this morning. But I would invite, if Chairman Hicks is good with it, we'll invite the state engineer's office up to be able to address, and we'll try to stick to the bill. You had one very simple amendment as well, suggestion that you had, so come on up.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have all of those amendments, and I can help walk those in. But certainly, I like to phone a friend.
All right. Do you have anything to add on the bill? The state engineer's office is okay with this, because I remember in the interim when we were working it, it appeared to be something that you would work out fine for the engineer's office to do.
Yep.
correct?
Mr. Chairman, I would just say that a majority of the bill, I believe it is, like Senator Hicks said, is more of a civil issue. The one component that we are involved in is housing the document, and I believe that Senator Hicks will address our only comment to that. But other than that, I don't have any comments on the bill itself.
Any questions, committee? Dalton, you had a question. Are you good for now?
Oh, I didn't have a question.
Okay. You had your hand raised for a little while and I didn't get to you. So what we're trying to do is take the document that has been formed and codify it. That, in a nutshell, is what we're doing. And the state engineer's office can, if I understand things correctly, keep these prescribed easements, but not, okay. Why don't you, Mr. Brown, tell us what that change is and why there is a change that you'd like to offer. It seems pretty simple. Or Brandon, one of you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I do believe that Senator Hicks can address this too, but we, I believe it was in Senate Ag, we made a suggestion to, in the engrossed version, page 5, line 1, an amendment was made to strike the word maintain and my only comment is that in the engrossed version, I did not see that amendment is reflected in the engrossed version.
So, Mr. Chairman, that was a standing committee amendment, but when the LSO version, they forgot to strike that. So it's really a technical clarification because it was an omission by LSO, so. But
And
now it's page 5, line 1, strike maintain and at the end of that.
All right.
It literally is a technical correction because the standing committee passed the Senate of the whole. It was just a technical omission by LSO.
Okay. We may address it too, to just
They
be
just
sure
missed
it's in. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Is the committee fairly clear then what we're trying to do? Why don't you just go through your proposed amendment while you're there, Larry, and
Okay, Mr.
Make sure we
Chairman, what I
understand
would
it.
do is the first start with the proposals that Mr. Brown bought. Well, let's just start with the beginning, Mr. Chairman, and walk through them. Maybe you can do them, given the time, it's just one global amendment. So, page 3, line 13, the catch that Representative Slagle caught, Mr. Chairman, would be under page 3, line 13, after provide, insert not. Mr. Chairman, The next one would be on page 4. Is the proposed amendment you have on line 2. Again, this was just a technical correction. When LSO did the engrossed version, they changed the word from conveys to coveys. So we want to change that back. Again, that's a technical correction, but then we also wanted to bring in on page 4, line 3, after purpose, including any aperturant head gates and diversion structures. We just want to make it clear that that prescriptive easement just doesn't start at the bank on the river or the creek. It actually crosses and includes that infrastructure as aperturant to the ditch. That's all the amendment does, Mr. Chairman. And then if we go on to page 4, these are some good catches by Mr. Brown here. Page 4, go to line 11 on your engrossed version. After size, insert the word of the water conveyance.
Page 5?
Yeah, page 4.
Page 4.
Yeah.
Line 11. After the word size, insert of the water conveyance. And then you've got the existing word and then insert the before volume. And then, Mr. Chairman, if you go to page 4, line 12, it says in the, insert water. Mr. Chairman, then page 4, line 18 is the conforming after of the, insert water. Mr. Chairman, page 4, line 21, after the conforming amendment, water. We want to make sure this says water conveyance, water conveyance, water conveyance, because it ties it back to the definition. And then, Mr. Chairman, page 5 is the technical correction, but you guys could go ahead and include that now in this amendment. So LSO, it catches it twice, page 5, line 1 that the state engineer pointed out. At the end of line 1, strike the word maintain and. Mr. Chairman, that would be the amendment for your consideration.
Okay. Thank you. And you got those corrections, and we'll just have one amendment, hopefully, to deal with. Is there any further public testimony? Come on up, Kelly and Brett.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if there's no more questions for me, I have some other responsibilities I need to
Really?
attend to.
No, you have to stay. Thank you, Chairman Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, that's hostage. You're keeping the Senate hostage.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, who's going to carry this on the floor, but I'd be more than happy to sit down and help all of my documents and walk through with Representative Conrad and provide you some of the arguments that we heard on the Senate side, so you're prepared for those if they show up on the House side, and we can walk through those issues. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks, Larry.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Moline.
Mr. Chairman, there is one item that I would like to have the majority floor leader from the Senate listen to. It's on page 2. When you talked about the potential abandonment of water rights, it made me think that on page 2, line 2, do we need to insert if water is available about the 10 years of continuous use? Would that, that is a question. Do we need to add that? Because if water's not available and you don't use it, does that affect the 10 years? That's a question that I have. I wanted the good senator to be able to hear that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that issue actually Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, that issue actually come up on the floor. And again, as long as you're actively using your water right. Historic practices, particularly when you got direct flow diversions, when the creek dries up, you don't have water. That is not, we don't need to include. In fact, I think it would probably weaken the bill if we said if water is available. But that issue did come up, Mr. Chairman, and I think the bill is fine the way it is because it recognizes those historic and continuous uses. And we all know that when you have direct flow water rights, that often happens. So I hope that addresses
Yes.
it. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, yes.
Thank you,
I apologize for not introducing myself.
Thank you, Senator. Okay. I'll start with Mr. Moline.
Again, sorry, Mr. Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I'm sitting in general support of this bill. This is an issue that's coming up as things get subdivided. Sometimes the old agreements, we found out that there wasn't ever a recorded easement there. I mean, that's happened with water, it's happened with utilities. So having this, I think, is a good thing. Now, this next issue is going back way, way last century when I still had English classes in high school and college. I'm concerned that on page 3, if you put on there the not less than 48 hours, you're forming a double negative, because in the upper part, it says, but in no case shall no notice be provided less than 48 hours. The way I remember English, that's written correctly. If we put the not less than in there, not being an attorney, but kind of remembering what I did in English class way many years ago, is that introducing a double negative, which would then convolute the technicalities of it. In my opinion, it reads correctly now. You know, the gist of it, you have to do it in not less than 48 hours. In no case shall it be less than 48 hours. To me, that reads correctly. Again, Mr. Chairman, I apologize for going way back into the 1980s when I took English and got chastised for using double negatives. Ain't that right?
That is correct, except attorneys don't necessarily play by the rules. The other way we could do it that would probably be proper, but in any case, shall notice be provided not less than 48 hours would probably address your concern, but I don't know as present language. Is everybody clear on the present language, or is it confusing? Without the not.
I say move the bill.
Okay, Representative Slater.
I looking at that, I would almost agree with what you said. Take out in no and insert any. So, but in any case, shall notice be provided not less than 48 hours.
Representative Conrad, once you're through laughing at what we're doing.
No, I mean, I apologize. English is my
Oh, that's
second
okay.
language. I'm in agreement with Representative Schlegel.
Okay, all right. We might switch a few words around. Do some word crafting is what we call it as legislators. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to apologize for muddying the waters, pun
No.
intended. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any other questions the esteemed committee may have for me.
Okay, no further questions.
All right. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Kelly Little. I'm with the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. I'll be very brief. The association supports this bill. We appreciate any clarity that can be provided on, both for landowners and for water users. We think this bill does that. And with that, I will stand for questions.
Questions, committee? Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, no, nothing online. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
It's been moved and seconded by Banks. Changes, discussion? Okay, Representative Davis,
I'd like to run the amendment that was presented,
go ahead and move it.
move the amendment that was presented to engross bill 0046 with the caveat, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
Page 3, line 13. Remove not.
okay, and put
I think it's good the way it says. It says,
Okay.
there's no exceptions when you say no case. That means there's no exceptions.
All right. Committee, is everyone okay with that minor change? It's word, however you like it, word crafted. Yes, Representative Conrad.
It goes back to that old, Mr. Chairman, it goes back to never say never.
Okay,
I caution us with that.
all right. Other,
I think I'm comfortable with that. Just reading through it, I hadn't caught the no case earlier when I was reading it, so I got down there. So I'm comfortable with putting it back the way it was.
okay.
Question on the amendment.
All right, now we have some other additions, and I think our secretary probably got it. The inclusion of water in front of conveyance in several places. We're removing maintain and all of that will be in this amendment submitted by Senator Hicks. Okay. We're pretty clear on that. Okay, I think we're ready to vote on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That amendment passes. Any further discussion on the bill? I think we're ready to vote.
Representative Allemand.
Aye.
Representative Allred.
Aye.
Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Conrad.
Aye.
Representative Craigo.
Oh, excuse.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Slagle.
Aye.
Representative Winter.
Aye.
Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
8 ayes, 1 excused. Do pass with amendments.
Okay, the bill passes and we're adjourned. And better hurry, we'll be late.